start by thanking Dr. Prem for inviting medical protection for this student talk. I also want to thank the rest of the RUMC faculty, Dr. Devaki, and Janice for the support. Today, we have a very exciting session planned for an hour. We will start the webinar with the highlight of the day, which is a presentation by our MPS medical legal expert, Dr. Uzair, on how to avoid medical legal pitfalls, followed by myself on MPS membership. We will end the session by taking questions from you. There is a Q&A tab that you can use anytime in this session. This will be addressed towards the end of the session today. I am proud to present my colleague, Dr. Mohamed Faruqi Uzair, who graduated in medicine from the University of Malaya and is currently a medical legal consultant at MPS in the United Kingdom. Previously, he held the position of director in the Medico Legal Section, Medical Practice Division, Ministry of Health Malaysia. His passion for medical legal issues led him to join the Medico Legal Society of Malaysia. Without any further ado, please allow me to introduce Dr. Uzair.
Thank you very much, Julia. I'm really happy to see that there are about 76 participants so far, which is really good. And it's really different giving a talk on a platform as compared to being face to face. I don't get to see any of your faces, which is a little bit more challenging. Without further ado, let me just share my slides. Can I just confirm with you, Julia, are you able to see my screen?
Yes, I can.
All right, thank you very much. I mean, it's really quite amazing what technology can do these days. Because I'm right now based in London. It's about 7 a.m. and the temperature is 1 degrees. I'm really missing the Malaysian weather. And I'm sure it's nice and sunny there. All right, I think Julia later at the end of the presentation will be telling you a bit more about what MPS is and what they do. So I won't go into this. And I mean, it's really important to sort of understand why are medical legal issues important. I remember as a medical student, it wasn't really taught in medical school. I think maybe now things have changed, looking at the current climate of, I mean, nowadays we do hear more frequently that doctors are getting sued, doctors are getting into trouble. And it's really important that doctors are aware of the legal issues, especially the medical legal issues. And as doctors, you know that we all make mistakes. I mean, as human, I mean, that's to be human. Even an experienced surgeon can slip up. And as I mentioned just now, the current scenario is we as doctors, we need to educate ourselves about how the medicine and law interacts. And I guess that's where attending lectures such as this would be really helpful. So what are the top 5 medical legal pitfalls? When I say pitfalls, I'm referring to which are the areas in medical practice where a lot of things can go wrong or where it commonly occurs. And the 5 are consent, prescribing confidentiality, documentation, and probity. I'll go through one by one. Give a little bit of tips. I'm going to share a lot of my experience. Before this, I was with the Ministry of Health in the Medico Legal Section, whereby we handle all the medical legal complaints arising from all the facilities in MOH. And I think you, as medical students, will be attached to the government hospitals during your clinical years, which I'm aware is going to happen soon. You're in your 3rd year, so you should be attached. And maybe in Penang, maybe to the Penang General Hospital. I've been there a few times. So what happens when there is a case from the Ministry of Health, will send people to investigate, and I'm going to share with you my experience with that. And consent is really one of the most important things that has changed recently when compared to before. Maybe those days, doctors, when they wanted to do a procedure, they didn't really have to take as a thorough consent as we do now. Nowadays, it's all about patients' rights. It's all about patients' autonomy, and that's where consent is really important. And I'm trying to, when we go through this, I'm going to try to think of, as a medical student, what is it that you can, I mean, it's always good to develop the good habits so that when you become house officers, medical officer specialists, you have this sort of ingrained in you. So it's really easy to, so it should come as second nature to you. And the question is consent just a signature on a form? Well, the answer is no. Consent is more than that. Consent is a process. It's about making sure that the patient understands what is the procedure that's going to happen to them, and they need to make a choice with all the information that's available. And it is your duty as a healthcare practitioner to ensure that that information is being relayed to the patient. And the question is, who should take consent? It's a really good question. I'm going to leave it with you so you can ponder upon it. But as medical students, are you supposed to take consent? No. As a house officer, should you take consent? The answer is also no, unless you are the one who's performing the procedure. So that's something interesting. And like I said just now, is consent only about taking a signature to the form? The answer is no. And even as medical students, I'm sure you need to practice a lot, taking patients' blood pressure, taking blood from patients. I think those are one of the things that you need to do as well. And you should always ask the patient. And this sort of consent is sort of an implied consent, because the fact that the patient gives out the hand for you to take blood or for you to take the blood pressure, that in itself implies consent. You don't ask the patient to sign a form every time you want to take the blood pressure, do you? So that's also a part of consent. So what are the tips for consent? You should always act in your patient's best interests. I mean, this is mainly for house officers. So like I said, as medical students, you should keep into the good habits of following, so that when you become house officers, you're going to be really good house officers. And something that you must remember, that patients also have a right to refuse treatment as medical students. I remember when I was a medical student, we used to go to the wards, especially if there's an interesting case. A lot of medical students would go. Always remember, you need to ask permission if you want to examine the patient, and you should also be a bit more mindful that the patient also have a right to refuse. As a medical student, if you want to do a procedure or if you want to do a physical examination, if the patient is tired, just tell them, okay, I understand. Can I come back later? I'm sorry to disturb you. I mean, just be courteous and try to understand and put yourself in the patient's position. And you should also understand that can children take consent? And that's a whole different issue altogether. About incompetent adults, yeah, that's something. I mean, the good thing about being a medical student or a junior doctor is that you should always ask for help. If there's one of the best advice I can give you is, if you're not sure, ask, and always ask for help. Prescribing, this is definitely one of the most dangerous areas for clinicians. And I mean, you have to understand what the patient's allergies are, dose are, frequency, and never guess. This is a really important point. I remember one of the first cases that I handled was in Sabah, where during the ward round, the specialist and the husband especially does a ward round, and he gives the orders to the husband to write. So this patient was, if I remember correctly, he was a pediatric patient who came in for nephrotic syndrome and was to be discharged with prednisolone, which is steroids. So the consultant said, please give the OD dose, which is once daily, but the husband wrote BD. So that in the end, what happened is the patient took an overdose of prednisolone, and because of that, over a long duration, became immunocompromised and subsequently passed away because of a really bad infection. So something is just changing the letter O to a B. So from once a day to twice a day of drugs being given to the patient, it affected the outcome and caused the patient to die, unfortunately, in this case. So that's how important it is. I think we need to break the stigma about doctors having really bad handwriting. I mean, especially if it saves lives. As you can see here, even the dosages, yeah, you can't really depend on the drug's physical appearance because they will change the color and the names. Some drugs have really similar names, so you really need to be careful with that. Yep, this is exactly what I've been telling you just now. And as a house officer, you should also be, I mean, as a junior doctor, you should be careful as well. Sometimes patients will ask you about the drugs and all that. I think one of the problems as a medical student is patients don't know that you are a medical student. So whatever advice you give, they will take it as like a specialist. So whenever you go and see patients in the ward, you should always tell them, I'm a medical student. It's always a good habit to introduce yourself. My name is so-and-so. I'm a medical student. Can I examine you? Can I ask you a few questions? Can I take a history? Make sure you emphasize that you are a medical student. If not, it can have dire consequences. There was an incident where the patient was arguing with the doctors because he said, oh, there was another doctor who told me this. And when we investigated, the other doctor actually was a medical student, and the advice might not be correct in that sense. So always know your limitations. The second thing that I can advise you, first was to always call for help or get help. And secondly is know your limitations. So as a medical student, you're not expected to know everything. Medicine is a lifelong process of learning, so always bear that in mind. Third is confidentiality. I mean, this word is being discussed a lot, but basically what it means is, in Latin, it means to trust. Basically, it's talking about the patient's information. And this is really important in the doctor-patient relationship. And that there are certain laws that govern confidentiality. Among them is the Personal Data Protection Act. This actually applies for commercial data, but in private healthcare facilities, they need to follow this as well. And something that perhaps Hippocrates did not have to face would have been social media. And social media now has become part of our lifestyle. And it's really important on how you interact with social media as a healthcare professional. All right, are you allowed to post patients' information on social media? The answer is no. And if you do want to use patients' information, you should always ask for consent. And if you want more information on that, you can refer to the Medical Council guideline on consent for, even if you want to take images, if you want to use the information, you need to take consent. Remember that confidentiality or confidential information also includes the patient's name. Even the patient's name is confidential, so that's something you really need to be careful with. Children also have the same rights to confidentiality. And is the confidentiality absolute? The answer is no. There are circumstances where you can break confidentiality, and I would say it's a bit more complex than that. I can give you a whole lecture 1 hour about what confidentiality and what circumstances, but basically, if it's going to harm someone else, you can breach that confidentiality. If there are legal statutes, for example, now you talk about COVID. If someone is COVID positive and you want to do contact tracing, and the patient says, no, I don't want my people around me to know that I have COVID. No, as you can see, it outrules the society needs, where your information needs to be shared with the health authorities so that they can do contact tracing. And that's also the same for HIV and TB and all this infectious disease, as mentioning, because if there is an act that allows you to breach the confidentiality, so that act would overrule that duty of confidentiality. So that's basically it. And as medical students, you need to be aware of your surroundings. You can be sometimes be caught in I remember an incident where when I was a medical student, I was talking with my colleague while we were lying up for buying food. And when we were discussing, the person behind us said, oh, are you talking about my relative in the ward or something? So you need to be really careful with your surroundings. And another thing is, medical students, you do a lot of work, you bring your thumb drive everywhere, make sure you keep it safe, because there might be some confidentiality information in thumb drives that you bring around. And as I said, social media is really where we see a lot of cases with regards to social media. Basically, it's patients can post their own information, but you as a doctor, you can't post the patient's information. So bear that in mind, please. All right, documentation. When things go wrong, you can't remember, because when the complaint comes, it's going to be maybe weeks, months, or years after the incident has happened, and you won't really remember what happened. So that's where documentation plays a really important role. It's also to assist the patient when receiving treatment. And as I said, for future litigation, it will form one of the basis of sources of information. And if your notes are really poor, it can be reflective of a bad quality of care. So this is really something that you really need to be mindful of. All right, as a medical student, are you allowed to write in the medical records in the hospital? I would say no. But the thing is, you wait before the first day you step into the ward, or as a medical student, you need to find out what are the things that you are permitted or not permitted to do. I think that should be covered. And if you're not sure, always ask your lecturer or your supervisor and to try to find out. I mean, the doctors in the hospital, the government hospital, they might not know that what your limitations are, so you should always remind them. you, at the same time, I'm sure you would like to learn from the doctors as well. But let's say if you are not confident or competent on taking blood, don't just do it because someone else asks you to do it, because there can be some consequences. Recently, one of the cases that we are handling now is when a medical student took the blood without any supervision, and there can be dire consequences. For example, you might hit a nerve, you might cause infection. So you really need to be really careful when it comes to these things. If you want to do things, make sure it's within your competency, and make sure you have adequate supervision as a medical student. When you talk about documentation, although you can't really write in the notes at this point in time, let's say you do go to the hospital and something does go wrong, what can you do? Because you're not going to remember when, let's say it becomes an investigation later on, you will not remember. So my advice is you need to write it down in your own personal journal. Write the date, write whatever it is that you can remember, so that next time if something comes up, you always have something to rely upon. So it can be your own documentation. Sorry. Yeah, so that's really important, and you also need to be really careful about taking the patient's photographs, sharing the X-ray and CT scan results. Now that you need to, well, ideally you should ask permission from the patient as well. So that would be the best. I'm going to share with you some of this. If you go to the hospital, I think Penang, GH, if it's not computerized, or Bukit Mutajam, I've been there before. These are sort of the things. And you need to be really professional when you do your notes. Like if you look at this, transfuse 2 pints Excel. Okay, it looks all well. And the third one is do finger up the NS harmonic, which is not the proper terminology. You need to write, like, for example, you should say do a rectal examination. And you can see here, this has been around in social media, I think a few years back, where it's not actually licking, it's leaking, so it makes a lot of difference what it is. It's a chief complaint. And I think the problem is perhaps with the younger generation. I mean, your generation as a medical student, we are so used to WhatsApp and social media, we tend to bring this sort of habits into the documentation, which is not appropriate. For example, in this case, the HO entry, which is the house officer, said that regarding the CTG, CTG is for the monitoring of the pregnancy, especially during the delivery, prior to delivery. Computer, the CTG machine, which looks at the heart rate of the baby and the contractions. He said, asked to WhatsApp the photo of the ECG, WhatsApp sent. She replied, okay, boleh discharge. I mean, this is not professional when you talk about the medical records. And you need to remember that these medical records can be viewed by other people and can be brought up in court later on. All right, this is the last pitfall that I would like to discuss, which is basically probity. Probity would be the quality of having strong moral principles, and you need to be honest with everything that you do. Especially here in the UK, we do have a lot of cases whereby medical students have been brought to fitness to practice, and these things can happen. Even in Malaysia, if you have some problems, you can have a disciplinary tribunal, and you might not even become a doctor, be allowed to become a doctor. So you need to take things really seriously, even as a medical student. And if you're uncertain, always double check your work. Do not abuse the position that you are in. Yeah, I think we're almost at the end of it. I keep it really nice and short, share a bit of my experience, because I do expect a lot of questions from medical students. It can be anything. It can be anything related to medical legal. It can be about, I mean, as the more you go to start your clinical years, you'll understand that there's a lot of things that you don't know. I mean, that's the irony of being educated more and more. The more that you know, the more you know that what you don't know. So that's something that it's quite interesting. And as a medical student, I understand you can feel that it's really the hardest part of your life. No, I tell you what, houseman is going to be harder. And then when you're going to be a medical officer, that's going to be harder as well. When you're going to be a specialist, it's going to be even harder. So that's life for you. It's really good to get used to that. But as you grow, so will your experience, and the way that you handle things. So it's really important. So I'm just really going to summarize. Basically, know your limitations. Always ask for help. I think that's the best advice you can give for medical students when you are facing your day-to-day challenges. And it's really interesting how things are with the healthcare sector now, especially with the COVID era. Yep. So you really need to protect yourself as well. Ensure that you're wearing the proper PPE. You don't feel that you're being forced to do things that you are not comfortable with. Always remember to say no. For example, one of the cases that I remember for a student, a nursing student, because they are also attached to the wards. What happened was the senior nurse asked the nursing student to give the medication to a patient, and the student asked how to give, and then the nurse said, just crush it and give it. So what the nursing student did, she crushed the medication and she gave it as an intravenous bolus. But what she was supposed to do was supposed to give it into the NG tube, nasogastric tube. And this actually caused the patient to die, because when you give an oral medication into your veins directly, it can have severe consequences. Yeah, I mean, all the stories that I'm sharing you are true stories, which is quite sad to hear these things which could be prevented if you follow the proper things. All right. With that, I do expect more questions, please. And I'm going to hand it over to Julia to tell us a little bit more about what MPS is and how MPS can help you.
Thank you so much. I can see that there are questions already. We will address this at the end of the session. So I'm just going to quickly just run through a little bit about the Medical Indemnity Malaysia, specifically about student membership. Can you see my screen, Uzair?
Yeah.
Yep. So just to share a little bit about MPS, MPS is actually the world's leading medical defense organization. So we put members first by providing professional support and expert medical legal advice throughout your career. We have more than 300,000 members worldwide. We are a member-owned, Doctors for Doctors, mutual organization, a not-for-profit, and we exist purely for the benefits of our members. We hire doctors such as Dr. Uzair and many others globally who are local doctors from different specialities to provide support and reassurance when a member needs to speak to a sympathetic clinician for support and sharing. In fact, like today's sharing session, your journey with us starts like many others when you're in the medical or dental school. We provide 24/7 assistance whenever you need it, and not just when a claim arises. Today, we are proudly support members in the United Kingdom, Ireland, South Africa, New Zealand, Australia, Hong Kong, Malaysia, Singapore, the Caribbean, and Bermuda. In Malaysia, we are proud to have more than 4,000 members. Sometimes the price of indemnity seems high. Unfortunately, this is because doctors are providing healthcare in an ever-increasing litigious society. An innocuous situation or clinical faux pas can lead to years for a physician defending his or her actions in court and comes with significant cost. So MPS gives you the protection you need to practice with confidence in today's complex and uncertain healthcare environment. It is important to identify who offers the protection that you will need and what type of protection. You are responsible for the lion's share of the decisions about the parameters that define how your risk, financial security, and reputation can be safeguarded. When it comes to potential litigation of medical malpractice, it is unfortunately about a case of when rather than if. MPS recognizes that doctors are likely to experience at least 2 incidents during their career lifetime. Studies by the University of South Carolina and even Harvard University identify that the risk of getting sued exceeds 75%, with 1 in 5 chances claims payment. So when choosing your medical indemnity, you should have a checklist of questions that you should consider. So some of the questions that you can actually consider includes, what type of support am I getting from my indemnity provider? What is the experience of this insurance or medical indemnity provider? The cost, if they're providing to you at a very low cost, are these costs sustainable? What provisions of protection is there for retirement? Are there any limitation for your claims in the terms and conditions? So some of the key coverage of your medical indemnity should include the following. These are claim, criminal investigation, defamation, ethical legal dilemma, generic medical legal advice, inquest, medical counsel issue, patient complaint. As a student member, your membership with MPS is free. So what does this mean? So as a student member, you will have access to the full benefits of membership, including emergency telephone advice to help you through any medical, legal, or ethical dilemmas you may encounter while you are away. MPS offers you access to free elective protection in most locations that medical students choose to spend their electives. So I understand, like yourselves, you've just came back from Dublin. So the electives, it includes locations such as USA, Canada. Once you are a student, it is unlikely that you will need to approach us for advice or assistance. However, our medical legal advice service is open to members with urgent queries 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. As part of your student membership, you will also be able to attend our regular medical legal talk, like the one that's presented by Dr. Uzair earlier. You will have 24/7 access onto our online learning platform Prism, which I will show you a little demo later, as well as our publications such as the Student BMJ and International Journey of Surgery. At MPS, we believe in supporting our medical students. One of the ways in which we do this is by sponsoring various sports, social, and academic events. So I'm just going to quickly log onto our Prism page for me to show you the access that you will get. Just give me a minute. Okay, can you see my Prism page? So as a student member, you will have access to this page. So once you have actually logged onto the page, there are various tabs. So the first tab that you will see is a record of your learning. So for any of the webinars or the courses or e-learning that you have completed, it will keep a record. And once you have completed a program, you will also be awarded a certificate. So we have a full catalog of e-learning, webinars, which includes even hot topics. So if I could demonstrate one of the hot topics that we have actually organized in Malaysia. So telemedicine is one of the hot topics. So you can actually even review and enroll into that we organized in April last year. So with your student membership, you will be able to have access to this 24/7. So now I will share with you on how you can actually join our student membership. So I understand that everyone here is already convinced and you'll be very interested to join as a student member. So
Julia, I don't think it's showing us full screen. Can you try and get it full screen? Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm sure you are wondering how much it's going to cost to join as a student.
Oh, it's free.
Yeah, so I'll let Julia share the good news. It's free, and MPS will be giving free student membership for you.
Okay, let me try resharing again.
Okay, and I remember as a student, anything that's free is really good because we are on a tight budget. I mean, as students.
Okay. Can you see it?
Yeah, but it's not moving to the next slide.
Okay,
You can use slide. Yeah.
Okay. So what I've also provided is actually a link where you can actually fill out our application form. So post of this session, I will actually be sending everyone an email with a link to join as an MPS member. Dr. Prem and Dr. Devaki and Janice will also be assisting on that. So if you have any further questions, you can actually get in touch with us post of this session. So perhaps, again, maybe we can actually start the Q&A session. So I understand that we've got a few questions. So Uzair, maybe I can start channeling the questions to you.
Yeah, please do. I've been eyeballing these questions, and the quality of the questions are really good. I mean, I can see that the younger generation are a bit more aware and concerned about these issues, and I'll try to answer as much as I can.
Sure. So Shuhada has a question. Do you mind to share any suing stories involving medical students?
Yeah. The thing is, if you look at how, when you talk about suing people, I'm going to talk about it a little bit in general. When you want to sue a doctor or somebody, it's always best to sue as many people as possible. And especially if you want to sue, you should also involve the employers of the employee who did the mistake. For example, if I want to sue, if I'm a patient and I want to sue the hospital in Penang, for example, the Penang GH, I would sue the doctor, the medical student, the houseman, the specialist, and most importantly, the government of Malaysia, because when you sue, you want to get financial compensation. And if you just sue the medical student themselves, you can't get a lot of money, because I think the medical student themselves don't have much money also. So when you look at the cases when people are getting sued in the healthcare professional involving the government sector, they will sue everyone from the pengarah to all the way up. So as a medical student per se, you may not be the one who is going to be named unless the thing that was done wrong was you, it was 100% on you. Then you can be liable as well. And most likely they're going to not just sue you, they're going to sue you and your university and your supervisor and the hospital, and they're going to sue whoever has the responsibility. So as a medical student, the question is who has the responsibility? Of course, you as a medical student, you have that responsibility. It will also fall upon the supervisor, and I mean, yeah, it's as complex as that, and the court will have to look into all these issues as well. With regards to medical students, we don't really have that much cases where medical students are being sued, but what can happen is, as a medical student, is there a potential to be sued? Yes, there is always a potential. The moment you are involved, you touch the patient, there is a potential. But the question is, when you do, you may be called to court as a witness to see what happened if you are involved in the care. Yeah, so I mean that's the gist of it. And from my experience, I think when investigations happen, the medical student will be called in. If the medical student is involved, let's say it's the medical student who took the blood, and because of outside a line, and because of that, what happened to the line was it became infected, and the patient had to undergo operations and all that. So yeah, definitely a medical student can be sued, because who inserted the IV line? It was a medical student. And did they do it correctly? Did they ensure that it was done with a aseptic technique? Or did they put the alcohol swab before they put in the granula? Did they test the competency of the granula before they started drugs? So these are all potential areas. So you need to be careful. Even as a medical student, you can be sued. So you need to remember that.
Okay, we've got another question. And this question is from Amirul. What is the process like if we were involved in a medical legal issue as a houseman officer, which I think you've already answered a little bit?
Yep.
And how often and how serious are medical legal problems within the Malaysian healthcare in general? Can you suggest books or sources on medical legal anecdotes for Malaysian healthcare scenarios?
Yeah. All right. Yeah, that's a really interesting question. You need to, I'm going to answer the first question first. When things go wrong, you need to realize when things go wrong, it's not only, you shouldn't just be worried about getting sued. You can also, there are many avenues, or it's one incident can lead to multiple jeopardies. For example, number one, it can be a complaint to the medical council. So what happens in the medical council is, if you were to be found wrong by the medical council, the most severe form of punishment is you can be removed from the medical registry, which means that you cannot be a doctor anymore. So you really need to be really mindful of that. So one incident, something goes wrong, it can go to the medical council. Secondly, it can become a court case. Thirdly, it can be an internal external investigation by the hospital. I mean, that's especially if you see it in the Ministry of Health, we call it as a disciplinary. It can be a criminal case. Let's say there are allegations. Yeah, I'm going to take this opportunity. I think one of the things that I did not mention in my hazard was that as medical students, when you are doing a physical examination on a patient, etc., you need to make sure that there is a chaperone, because you do not want to be caught in a situation where the patient alleges that you might have molested the patient, or you have done something that whether you did it or not, that allegation can still arise if you put yourself in a compromising situation. So you really need to be careful with that. So, and it can also become a criminal case. And if that is the case, the police will start the investigation. You can go to jail. We have doctors that we help. The thing about MPS is because we help in so many different countries, Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia, the UK, South Africa, Caribbean, and Bermuda. We have the wealth of knowledge from all these countries, whereby we do handle criminal cases. One of the big cases recently was in Hong Kong, where a doctor gave some treatment through IVSS, and the treatment that was given was contaminated, and because it was sort of a cosmetic procedure, unfortunately the doctor has gone to jail because of that. So these are the things that you really need to be careful. So it's not just about being sued, it's not just about the medical council, there's also multiple areas that you can be caught in trouble practicing as a doctor. So I think that's something that we need to remember. And it's good that you have this awareness early on as a medical student. You don't want to be caught in the situation and then only realize, oh, this can happen. Yeah. What was the second part of the question? Sorry.
Okay. The second part of the question was, hold on, how often and how serious are medical legal problems within the Malaysian healthcare in general? Yeah. Can you suggest books or sources on medical legal anecdotes?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. I don't think there are much of these anecdotes, but if you want to get more information, what you can do is you can go to the Medical Council website. They do have a summary of the cases, the things that they do. For example, maybe in last year, 5 doctors got striked off, and what are the circumstances that led to that. You can find that on the Medical Council website. You can also go to the MOH annual report. When I was with the MOH before, we handled maybe about 200 to 300 investigations per year all over Malaysia, and court cases would be around 40 to 50 court cases a year with regards to medical negligence issues. So I would say it is there. It's only going to stay. Patients are going to be more aware. Patients' expectations are going to be higher, and the expectations with doctors are also going to be higher. So all this can lead to a plethora of medical legal issues. So that's what it's here to stay, I would say.
Okay. So we've got a question for Anonymous. Many social media famous doctors shared patient information on social media, even though they hide the name initials, but they share the age, history, etc. Are we allowed to share that information, even though we have already hidden the patient's name? What is your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, I would say you still need to get the patient's consent if you want to share the medical information, because as long as it's identifiable to other people. So you might, if it's like a condition so unique that there's the only patient in the whole of Malaysia has it, and you put that information, even though you don't write the patient's name, if people know that is the person, you could be in trouble as well. So it's not just about the name, it's not just about the medical information. You really need to be careful when you are sharing this sort of information. And at the same time, you need to balance. I understand that you do want to share because it's an interesting case. It's something that people can learn from as well. So you really need to balance between the learning aspect, the education aspect, and the confidentiality aspect. So it's about a balancing process, I would say.
Okay. So some questions are actually privately, I think, in the chat button. I'm going to just pick up some of the questions here. Okay. Okay, so Jasdin has got a case, an imaginary case.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to read it to you. So let's say there is an emergency in a restaurant whereby a person has fainted. So we as junior doctors, so you're trying your best whilst waiting for the ambulance to arrive. So as a junior doctor, okay, so you administer whatever help you can, but unfortunately the patient dies. So now the family brings up the case against you, the junior doctor. So trying to prove that there's some sort of negligence. So as a junior doctor, how protected are you?
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're a junior doctor, you're a senior doctor, you're a layperson. If this situation were to arise, yeah, I mean, anyone can sue anybody. But the question is, what is your liability? And the scenario that you have described is something called a Good Samaritan. It's described as a Good Samaritan Act. It could be like maybe an airplane and you're a doctor there and you want to offer help and all that. So you need to be aware of this. And the moment you do help, you will be liable. And the standard of care, let's say you're a junior doctor, so the standard of care will be compared to that of a junior doctor. So what is a junior doctor expected to know when it comes to saving someone on an ambulance? It's different. If a layperson were trying to help, the standard would be different. So as a junior doctor, your standard is a little bit higher than a layperson. So if you know that the patient might have a fracture and you went and moved the patient forcefully, you could be liable for that. So there is that. So the moment you decide to help a patient, you have borne that responsibility as a Good Samaritan. The thing about Good Samaritan is certain countries have protection. There's a Good Samaritan Act in different countries. Unfortunately, Malaysia does not have that. So you would be liable. And the question is, how do you protect yourself? So that's where you should look for a medical indemnity or medical insurance that provides Good Samaritan cover. So that's something that you want to be aware of. Yeah, and I believe MPS does provide Good Samaritan cover. I mean, that's something that Julia maybe can comment on.
Okay, so to bring that question, maybe I'll tie it into this question, which is Malaysia now has mandatory indemnity. So what happens is, of course, you can see that a question that I also have from one of the students, I think the attendees, there are cheaper insurance options out there. So what is MPS comments on this? So I think ultimately for me, it is the focus on a comprehensive protection. So this is where MPS comes in. So MPS again is not for profit. We exist solely for our members. So we believe in protecting the careers and reputation of our doctors. Our coverage works differently from our insurance peers in that our coverage it is an occurrence-based product. So in terms of the coverage that you get, you are actually looking at beyond that year-on-year coverage. So I'll give you an example. So when you buy into a car insurance, so what happens is you pay that on an annual premium. Just like our insurance peers, your coverage that you will get for your medical insurance from our insurance peers is that it's a year on year. So what happens beyond that in the 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? MPS works very differently in that we cover you for the long haul. So perhaps when you are actually looking for that insurance or medical indemnity coverage, this is one of the criteria or the checklist that I went through earlier that you should be asking yourself. If the price is so cheap, what is the type of coverage that they're providing me? What are the limits? Limits, it would mean that, if I were to pay $600 for a GP light coverage, does that mean that I'm only covered up to 5,000 and 10,000 ringgit? So these are the things that you can consider. Yeah. So of course, if you've got any further questions on the MPS indemnity, feel free to actually get in touch with me. I can actually also forward you a comparison table between MPS as well as our insurance peers. Let me see if we've got any other questions.
Yeah, if you look at the early questions, I think there's one by Mohamed Aiman, I think. In case we accidentally breach one of the points you said just now, is there anybody you can help to protect us? I mean, that's why I would advise you please sign up to MPS today and protect you and can help you. But ideally, it should be your supervisor. When you are attached to a medical student, you would have your supervisor, your lecturer. They are there to help you as well. And following that is another question by Hari Narayan. Regarding medical students, writing on records or forms is acceptable if it is done under the supervision of the doctor and checked and signed by the doctor. Well, it would basically depend on what is your agreement, your university's agreement with the hospital, whether that is being allowed or not. That's one aspect to look at it. The second aspect I would say is if you do write on it, even if it is signed, the person who signs is ultimately going to take the responsibility. But then the person who signed can always say that, oh, it was written by someone else, and that person was going to be called. So you can get into trouble as well, and you're going to be called, and they're going to ask you, did you write this down? Yes, and if there's something wrong with that, you can be liable as well. So you need to be mindful of that.
I've got a question from Damia. Do we have access to PRISM only during our degree period? How about when we are already a doctor? Of course not. As long as you are an MPS member, so starting from your student journey, as long as you continue to be a member, you will have access 24/7 to our online learning platform, which is PRISM. And of course, with all the support that we have just discussed earlier. So Dr. Uzair will be there 24/7 for you.
Yeah, I'm part of a team that handles Asia, Caribbean, and Bermuda. It's quite interesting. Yeah, and every day we go through all the cases that the issues that doctors face.
Okay, let's see. Any more other questions? Let me try to spot.
If I can comment that the quality of questions are really good.
Yes.
And yeah, I think this is a question by Amirul. What are the example of coverage that MPS offer? Ms Juliah, you want to take that?
Okay. So in terms of the coverage that we offer, it was actually in my previous slide, but let me just give you a comprehensive answer. So it covers claims, criminal investigation, defamation, ethical legal dilemma, generic medical legal advice, inquest, medical counsel issue, and patient complaint. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically that's the thing when you compare with other insurance products, most of the insurance products they only cover for claims and maybe medical counsel. But as you can see in medical practice, there's so many things that can happen.
Correct.
Yep.
I think the most important thing is the difference between us and our insurance peers is that we cover you even without the case, actually becoming into a claim. So all the way at the onset, as long as you have a question for us, whatever the question may be, we are there to support you 24/7. So we've got a whole team of medical legal consultants and experts like Dr. Uzair, because we are doctors for doctors. So we can actually support you throughout your whole request. Whereas our insurance company, they only come into play when it's at that later stage, which is at the claim stage. So I think that's a very huge difference with them.
Yeah, I think there was a question in terms of pricing. I mean, pricing, it will depend on your risk, and risk is also related to your specialty. So maybe as a house officer, it will be much cheaper as compared to someone in an ONG specialist, might be much higher. And you can only get the pricing at the year. So I can't give you a pricing now for the next 3 years when you graduate, or maybe the next 2 years when you graduate. So, but it would be more or less the same. It wouldn't move much, depending. So if you get the quotation when you're about to start your practice, yeah. Yeah, I mean, COVID. There's another question about what are the potential COVID-related litigation. Yeah, it's really like a time bomb. No one really has any idea on the potential impact of COVID related to litigation. In fact, this was my dissertation. I just finished my master's in medical law and ethics. My dissertation topic was with regards to the standard of care in COVID-19 situation, whereby I discuss what are the potential things that can go wrong. For example, if you have been asked to, like especially in the UK, they are asking people from different specialty to come and help with COVID. So how would the court look at that? You are not really trained in that situation. In the UK, even medical students are being pushed to see patients because we are so overwhelmed by the disease. And whether the court will look at that and try to understand that situation, I think that's what we really hope for. But nobody really knows what's going to happen. Will there be an increase in litigation? I believe so, because even patients who had cancer, they had to delay the treatment for cancer, and this might have really bad consequences to the patient just because of COVID. So all this is a whole a lot of issues that needs to be discussed when it comes to COVID-related litigation. So it's really important, really interesting for me, really worrying for doctors, I guess, because there's no certainty. There have been calls for, especially in the UK and in America, whereby they said that doctors should be immune from litigation related to COVID because of the sacrifices that they're making, and we're doing it all in the best interest of the patient. It's a pandemic, it's an emergency, it's beyond anyone's level of competency in that sense. So there are big calls to have sort of immunity. So we'll see how it goes. I can't really give you an answer for that. Thank you.
Okay, 2 last questions, social media related.
Yeah.
Can a doctor, medical students use of social media be used against them? There has been posts overseas regarding doctors' behavior on social media, and it can be used against them to strip them of their license to practice. Your comments, please.
Yeah, exactly, and that's why I mentioned about social media earlier on. It's really important. You need to be careful. You can't have like a different personality on social media and a different personality when you're a doctor, in the sense that as a doctor, you're preaching people to go for vaccination, and suddenly in social media you said, oh no, nobody should take vaccination. So there itself, as a doctor, you have a responsibility, whether you are on social media or not. So yes, it can be used against you. It can lead to a complaint. It can lead to being called to the medical council, and if it's severe enough, you can be struck off as a medical doctor. There have been cases where a doctor in Malaysia has said something bad about some delivery process, and they got sued. You can even get sued for defamation and all that. So you really need to be careful what you write on social media. Yeah, there are a lot of cases related to that.
Okay, and perhaps just one last question. Are there possibilities of losing medical license due to medical legal issues? And does MPS play a role in avoiding so?
Yeah,
I think
so. Yeah, I think when you're talking about losing your medical license, you're talking about the registration, which is the medical council. So
Yep.
Yes, MPS does help with this. So the moment you get a complaint with the medical council, you need to let MPS know. We will get lawyers for you if necessary. We will go through the case. We will look at what is the best things that you can do to sort of mitigate it or to fight it, and to ensure that you get the best outcome possible with our expertise. So that's where it's really important to get the proper advice, proper help, and when it comes to something so important like your medical license.
Okay. All right. I think we are already close to an hour. So I'm thinking, yeah. So perhaps we can actually end the session today. So once again, I would like to thank the RUMC team for this invitation, specifically to Dr. Prem, Dr. Devaki, and Janice. Thank you once again for your invitation. And I look forward to receiving your student membership application. I will be following up with each and every one with you with an email with the membership link. So we will actually be in touch again for our next medical legal talk. Please get in touch with me too if you have any feedback on today's session. Thank you so much for your time. Semoga semuanya terus beransur pulih. Terima kasih. Thank you so much.